Ken, let's start with you. Walk us through these 37 counts. What is the former president facing in this indictment?
Gabe, he's facing a devastating portrait of willful misuse of classified information and an alleged conspiracy to obstruct justice. I've covered the intelligence community for more than a decade. I've covered a lot of classified document cases. I've never seen an indictment as detailed and as powerful as this one. You know, we should mention that obviously Donald Trump is innocent until proven guilty, but the details in this document are amazing. First of all, the impact and the moment of the documents itself that he had. And in paragraph 3 of the indictment, it says that the documents that Trump had included information regarding defense and weapons capabilities of both the United States and foreign countries, United States nuclear programs, potential vulnerabilities of the U.S. and its allies to military attack, and plans for possible retaliation in response to a foreign attack. And it goes on to say that the unauthorized disclosure of these documents puts at risk U.S. national security, intelligence sources, and methods. And then the indictment says, and on at least 2 occasions, Donald Trump did disseminate classified material to people who didn't have clearance to see it. And in one case, there's a recording of it. And there's a transcript of that recording laid out in this indictment. There's also a transcript of a recording that we know was made by one of Donald Trump's lawyers. So there's so many remarkable pieces of evidence in this that you don't normally see in a case like this. And just for context, Gabe, last week, an Air Force colonel was sentenced to 3 years in prison in a case where he was convicted of taking about 300 classified documents home over a course of years. No allegation that he shared the documents with anyone. No allegation that he obstructed justice. He got 3 years. This case is much more serious, and the obstruction of justice conspiracy is like a whole separate part of the case that alleges that Donald Trump conspired with his body man, Walt Nauta, to conceal and tried to enlist his lawyers in a scheme to conceal the fact that he had these documents even after the Justice Department came after him with a subpoena. And what you see as you read through this indictment is none of this had to happen. If Donald Trump had simply given these documents back the first time the government asked, this case would not have happened and we would not be here, Gabe.
Yeah, and Ken, this seems to be what's called a speaking indictment, of course. And really, as you look through it, it really tells a story here. Talk to me, Ken, about how this feels different than the other indictment a short time ago, a couple of months ago now, with the hush money case. How does this feel different than the state indictment up in New York?
Yeah, not to take anything away from that indictment, there's an argument to be made. It's an important enforcement of the rule of law in New York. But that indictment is very technical. It has to do with tax and business expenses. It was brought by an elected Democratic prosecutor, and almost immediately, even the most moderate anti-Trump Republicans dismissed that indictment as a political attack. Whether you believe that or not, that was their reaction. This is going to be much harder to do with this federal indictment, although people obviously are doing it, because this was an indictment brought by a career federal prosecutor who was not under the day-to-day supervision of Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States. The only role of Merrick Garland here was that he could have blocked any action by Special Counsel Jack Smith if, according to the regs, that action was so outside the normal practices of the Justice Department that it shouldn't go forward. That didn't happen, obviously. Jack Smith made these decisions on his own. That's why you saw Jack Smith today, not Merrick Garland, giving that news conference or that statement at his separate offices away from the Justice Department. So that's why this feels different. And also, it's a federal case, right? And so what you're going to have when Donald Trump surrenders on Tuesday is this remarkable picture of the former president, the man who was in charge of the federal government, now being fingerprinted and his mugshot taken and his passport taken away by the very government that he used to lead, Gabe.
And Ken, Renato, before I get to you, Ken, I just want to ask you very quickly, Walt Nauta, the body man, he's also been indicted. Can you dig into what role prosecutors allege that he played?
Well, what they say is that he helped Donald Trump conceal the fact that he had many more classified documents than he was willing to let on, and move boxes of those documents when the government was trying to find them. So before, for example, the Justice Department came down to visit, this indictment alleges that Walt Nauta took more than 60 boxes of documents outside of that famous storage room in Mar-a-Lago. And Gabe, we know from our own reporting that the Justice Department gave Walt Nauta and his lawyers a chance to come clean and to cooperate, and he just refused to do it. And his lawyers are being paid by a Donald Trump political organization. So right now he's facing some very serious charges. Now, whether he stays on Team Trump and maintains solidarity with Donald Trump in the face of this serious criminal case remains to be seen. But that's what they say. They allege a conspiracy between Donald Trump and his butler and body man to obstruct justice.
And Renato, what's your reaction to this indictment? Is this the best possible case the DOJ could have brought?
No question. I think it's fair to say that this indictment is more problematic for Trump, more serious than all of his other legal problems put together. This is an absolutely devastating indictment, very difficult to overcome. And I think a big part of his strategy here would have to be to create so much delay that he is in poor health or has ended his life before it actually gets to trial. Because I think that it'll be very challenging to explain away the obstructive statements with his attorney in particular. I think very challenging to explain why he's saying that, they should lie to the Justice Department and say they have no documents, to suggest that he praised an attorney who had destroyed documents allegedly. So just some comments that are very challenging to explain. And Ken mentioned, of course, that recording where he's talking about a document that he said he could have declassified, but he didn't, and it's secret, but he's nonetheless sharing it. Very challenging. And I will say also the breadth of documents at issue here, over 30, I think it's 31 counts of willful retention of national defense information, including nuclear secrets, for example. I think it's going to be very challenging for Trump and his team to explain to the jury why those are not important secrets to keep. So I just think on its face, this is not only a very devastating case, but it's a very straightforward type of case to prove and a very difficult case to explain away. And that's a very big host of problems all in one for the former president.
And Renato, in your role as a former federal prosecutor, you kind of touched on this just now, but do you think those recordings are the most crucial piece of evidence here?
I think so. I think they're extraordinarily important. I think, it depends on the way you look at it. The most important piece of evidence is the classified information found in his residence, right? In other words, that was what started all this. That's the proof in the pudding. You're seeing it on the screen right now. I think in many ways, this case is very different than the other legal problems that we've seen Trump have. A lot of the Trump matters have been white-collar cases where there's a focus on his state of mind. Did he have the intent to defraud? Did he have the intent to obstruct? And the thing about the willful retention of classified material, it's sort of like a drug case. If you have meth in your garage or in your house or in your office, that's a crime. And everyone knows that meth is not lawful to possess, or heroin is not lawful to possess. Those documents, it's apparent that after he's president, he is not lawfully possessing those documents, particularly, and I agree with Ken on this point, particularly when the Justice Department is trying desperately to get that stuff back. And to use the words of Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, you're jerking them around. And of course, as we see from this indictment, there's lies that are being fed in a alleged conspiracy to obstruct justice. I just think that's very challenging to explain away. And that at the core, putting the obstructive conduct to the side, the fact that he wanted those documents very badly, that he shared them, that he was desperate to keep them, I think that's very, very challenging to explain.
And I want to bring in Danny Cevallos now. Danny, put on your defense attorney hat here. How do you even go about defending this? Can you?
This is the rare case where we have gotten a preview of how the defense might approach this case. We've gotten it in a letter defense attorneys wrote to Congress, and we've gotten it through interviews that defense counsel and now former defense counsel have given on network news shows. And it may go something like this. Whether it's effective or not remains to be seen. But you may see a narrative where the defense develops a theme that early and often Trump, when he was approached by these agencies, he may not have turned over documents immediately, but he wanted to see what documents he could take and not take. And that initially, when the National Archives wanted these documents, that Trump's team was willing to work with them. And they will probably develop the theme, if they are able to make this into admissible evidence, a form of whataboutism. In other words, that the National Archives with other presidents set up an infrastructure to help them with the president to ex-president transition and the moving of documents. His defense team might argue that Trump didn't have the benefit of that, and if there was a haphazard removal of documents, it was inadvertent. They will probably argue that when the government set a deadline for the subpoena, they were inflexible. They didn't allow rolling production. They set an arbitrary date. But really, whether or not any of that's even admissible, let alone probative of a defense, is not really even a sure thing. But at least in terms of the general narrative they may try to put out there, it's probably going to center around inadvertence, and then the government will have the burden to prove this was much more than an accident. This was much more than an oops. This was something that was deliberate. And so far, they've made a lot of those facts out as alleged in the indictment.
You know, and Danny, I'm looking through this indictment right now. You know, you can see on page 19, it says, you know, a message between Trump employees. And one of these employees sends a text saying, quote, he's tracking the boxes. And Danny, I want to talk about, you know, early on, might a defense have been, look, he's a former president. He has a lot on his mind. He may have not actually known the details of where these boxes were. He wasn't paying close attention to it. He could perhaps say that this was something his employees did. But according to this, page 19 of the indictment, it appears that the former president knew exactly where they were and was asking them to be moved. How does former President Trump's team defend against specifically that?
I think you've hit on the major theme. Why are we here with this defendant? And it goes back to your two words, early on. I suspect this could have been averted if early on, and I think the Maginot line here is the time when agencies other than DOJ were involved, when the National Archives was saying, we would like our documents back. I fully believe that had Donald Trump negotiated and gotten those documents back before other agencies felt it necessary to make a referral to DOJ, we never would have been here. In fact, that's an argument that the defense is making. They're making the argument that this started out as National Archives using a federal statute that doesn't have any punitive measures, but they just wanted the documents back. Maybe the defense doesn't realize they're inadvertently making the prosecution's argument, which is only by escalating to this to the point that the National Archives and the other agency felt that they needed to refer this to DOJ, that was a line that was crossed. That was the point of no return. That was the event horizon. After that point, once DOJ was involved, you arguably already have intent of all of these, and I call them overlapping elements. I think concealment shares a lot in common with hiding documents or retaining documents or some of the other overlapping Venn diagram elements that are contained in this indictment.
And Ken, I want to go back to you. And as I'm going through this indictment as well, something that really jumped out at me that I thought was very interesting is there were several instances spread throughout the indictment where the special counsel's office decided to put in quotes from things that Donald Trump had said back in 2016 when it came to the handling of classified information. Of course, back then he was talking about Hillary Clinton. But why do you think that the special counsel's office found it necessary to put those specific quotes throughout this document? Was it a type of storytelling device, or was it perhaps to show that the former president should have known better?
I think both, Gabe. I mean, this is, as one of our guests said, the ultimate speaking indictment. And the Justice Department knew that they're not just speaking to an audience here of jurors or of the media, they're speaking to the whole country, half of whom is predisposed to doubt this case. And so they needed to put as much information there as possible. You know, the average person doesn't really deal with classified documents and doesn't maybe understand why they're so sensitive and, what the implications are of taking them outside of a sensitive facility. And so the Justice Department thought, well, maybe we'll inject some of what Donald Trump himself has said about this to help sort of fill out the picture. And they did a lot of different devices in this indictment to sort of try to explain why this matters. And then you heard Jack Smith. That was the theme of his remarks, really, is, the men and women of the intelligence community risk their lives to protect this information. That's why it's so important. And if I could just dovetail on something you said, Gabe, not only did Trump know where the boxes were. You know, all throughout this thing, many Trump defenders said, well, it's not like the president packed his own boxes when he left the White House. Actually, this indictment alleges he did in some cases. He was actually, according to this indictment, involved in packing his own boxes. So he was personally involved in taking some of this material from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, Gabe.
Incredible, some of the details that we learned just a few hours ago when this indictment was unsealed. Renato, I want to bring you back in, and I want to mention that this indictment includes the exchange captured on the recording at Bedminster. According to the transcript, former President Trump says, as president, I could have declassified them. Now I can't, but this is still a secret. How key is that piece of evidence?
Oh, it may very well be the most important piece of evidence in the whole indictment. I mean, there's different ways of looking at it. One thing I will say is, we often talk on shows like this about the downside of a person who's under criminal investigation speaking out. And here is part of the downside. Donald Trump, when he realized that the FBI had raided his residence, could have kept his mouth shut. But instead, he went on every program possible. He went on podcasts. He went on recordings. And he talked about what his defense was. He was telling Sean Hannity that his defense was that he declassified these things with his mind. And of course, he locked himself into what a defense might be here. And the prosecutors wisely have developed evidence that totally undercut that defense. And by the way, actually prove some of the charges that they've set out elsewhere. For example, he says that he knows that this information is secret, but he's sharing it with you anyway. As we noted a moment ago, that's transmittal of information. It shows his knowledge that it's a secret. So I just think the fact of the matter is this is just incredibly challenging. I mean, I thought Denny did a very nice job of setting out a potential defense. And often on the defense side, you're trying to just throw mud against the wall, trying to see what sticks. But it's just very challenging to run together a thread that resembles an actual credible defense that would actually get you out from under these charges. I will just say that it's very challenging. And I know this from experience on the defense side. I've been on the defense side for many years as well. Very challenging to get the jury to select not guilty, vote not guilty, and check that box 30-something times, 37 times. Even if one time they select guilty, that's the end for Donald Trump.
And Ken, before we go, I want to bring up something. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida says the DNI has not provided Congress with an assessment of potential risk to national security from these documents. Why not?
Well, one theory is they don't want to create a discoverable document that then gets injected into the trial. Because if they do a damage assessment, you can make an argument that Donald Trump and his attorneys will have a right to have it, and that could be a problem. But they are required by ODNI policy to eventually do a damage assessment, Gabe.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.